The pledge of the elder. One's was dust, an ancient promise scattered across the cold void. For 10,000 years, it had kept the peace. It had kept the horrors of the galaxy at bay. Now, that treaty was a ghost, a memory of safety, and humanity stood utterly alone. A gathering darkness swirled in the star fields. Its tendrils reached for the small lights of human colonies. The great silence followed the treaty's fall. One by one, the comm relays to alien allies went dead. The friendly signals were replaced by static, or worse, by the chilling war cries of new empires. Humanity was a young race, a small player on a board of ancient predators. Our star-born fleets were laughably small. Our worlds were plump, ripe for the taking. The darkness had a name. It was whispered first by deep space prospectors. They saw its shadow eclipse distant nebulas. Then it was spoken by terrified refugees. They fled systems that had simply vanished. The name was the Vorlag. They were not conquerors in the old sense. They did not want territory or resources alone. They were collectors of life itself. Humanity huddled behind its fragile planetary shields. We watched the star maps with growing dread. The red icons of Vorlag fleets spread like a disease. They moved with purpose. They moved with an unstoppable hunger. And they were moving toward us. The age of peace was over. The age of survival had begun. You remember old Earth with a startling clarity. It is a memory that feels more real than the cold steel walls around you. You recall the sensation of warm sun on your skin. You remember the smell of rain on dry soil. These are not just nostalgic echoes. They are anchors in a storm of despair. They are a reminder of what was lost and what could be again. The sky of that forgotten world was a brilliant blue. It was not the filtered, artificial light of a colony dome. It was vast and alive with clouds. The grass was impossibly green. You ran through it as a child. Its blades tickled your ankles. These sensations are your inheritance. They are the legacy of a peaceful species. Now, those memories are weapons. When the gray despair of the void presses in, you summon the blue sky. When the sterile air of the station chokes you, you remember the scent of pine forests. It is a rebellion fought inside your own mind, a refusal to let the present erase the past, a refusal to accept that this darkness is all that remains. That world of peace and prosperity seems like a dream, a fantasy from a children's storybook. But you were there. You lived it. Its memory fuels your defiance. It is the blueprint for the future you will fight for. You will not let humanity forget the feeling of a true sun on its face. You will not let them trade it for survival in the dark. The Vorlag fleet did not announce itself with a flash of light. It simply appeared. One moment, the space above New Damascus was empty. The next, it was a ceiling of jagged black metal. The ships were a storm of steel and shadow. They blotted out the stars. They blotted out all hope. Their design was a declaration of war, all sharp angles and weapon ports. A single transmission cut through every channel. It was not a voice of flesh and blood. It was a cold, synthesized tone. It resonated with absolute power and ancient arrogance. The voice of the Vorlag, supremacy. It did not ask for surrender. It stated the terms of your servitude. It declared humanity a subject race, a new asset for their sprawling empire. They demanded tribute, not in gold or precious metals. They had no need for such trivial things. They demanded a tribute of flesh and spirit. 10,000 human children to be taken for education. They would be raised as slaves and servants. Another 10,000 adults were to be given to their warrior caste. They would serve as living targets for training exercises. The final demand was the most terrible. They demanded the surrender of your will. All art, all music, all history that celebrated human independence was to be erased. You were to become a gray, compliant tool, a cog in their vast, uncaring machine. This was their tribute, the death of your soul. On the colony of New Damascus, the governor wept. He stood before the central comms panel. His hands trembled. The faces of his council were masks of pale fear. The Vorlag message looped on the main screen. The synthesized voice was a death sentence. The governor was preparing to accept the terms, to sacrifice a few to save the many. That was the grim logic of survival. You stood in the back of the chamber, a junior officer, unimportant, insignificant. But you felt something other than fear. A hot, furious anger burned in your chest. The memory of old Earth's blue sky filled your mind. You would not trade that memory for this bleak servitude. You would not allow it. Before anyone could stop you, you moved. You pushed past the stunned council members. You shoved the trembling governor aside. You stood before the comms panel. Your hand slammed down on the broadcast switch. The entire colony, the entire Vorlag fleet, was now listening to you. One human. One voice against a storm. You leaned into the microphone. Your own voice was steady. It was clear and filled with a cold fire. The Vorag had demanded tribute. They had demanded your spirit. You gave them your answer in a single word. No. The word echoed in the silent chamber. It shot across the void. A single act of defiance against an empire. The Vorlag commander answered your defiance. It did not speak. It acted. On the main view screen, you watched one of their smaller ships detach from the fleet. It descended with terrifying speed toward the planet's surface. It was not targeting a military installation. It was not aimed at the capital city. Its target was the Great Spire of New Damascus. The spire was a work of art, a testament to human ingenuity. It soared 5 kilometers into the artificial sky. It was a symbol of your colony's hope and pride. Generations had built it. Every colonist felt a connection to its graceful form. It was the heart of your world made manifest, a place where they held concerts under the simulated stars. The Vorlag ship did not fire a missile. It did not unleash a laser. It simply pulsed. A wave of shimmering violet energy washed over the spire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the spire began to dissolve. Not crumble or explode. It simply unwound, atom by atom. It turned into a shimmering cloud of dust that drifted away on the recycled air. It was an act of effortless erasure. The Vorlag commander's voice returned. It was laced with a faint amusement. "Your symbols are fragile," it said. "Your spirit will be equally easy to disassemble. Reconsider your answer." The command chamber was filled with gasps and cries of horror. The governor collapsed to his knees. But you just stared at the screen. You stared at the empty space where the spire once stood. Then you reactivated the comm. "It was a bit gaudy anyway," you said. "You did us a favor." A stunned silence was your only reply from the Vorlag ship. You showed no fear. You were confined to your quarters, a comfortable prison. The governor had called your actions insane. He called them suicidal. But he did not hand you over to the Vorlag. He was too afraid of what you might say next. So you waited. You stared at the metal walls. You listened to the hum of the life support system. You were alone. A single defiant voice, now silenced. The silence was broken by a whisper, a faint crackle from your personal comms unit. You had left it on by accident. It was a civilian model, not tied to the military network. The sound was faint. It was buried under layers of static and interference from the Vorlag fleet's jamming field. It was a sound that should not exist. You crept across the room. You pressed the comms unit to your ear. The sound was a pattern, a rhythmic sequence of clicks and tones. It was not a language you recognized. It was not human. It was not Vorlag. It was something else, something ancient and deliberate. It repeated its message over and over, a whisper in the vast, hostile void. The pattern was complex. It was a mathematical language. It was a set of coordinates, a location deep beneath the city, in the old, abandoned transit tunnels. The message ended with a single, clear image downloaded into your unit's tiny memory. It was a symbol, a stylized drawing of a broken chain. It was an invitation. An unknown ally was offering a sliver of hope. The coordinates led you to a forgotten maintenance hatch. It was hidden behind a decommissioned power conduit. The air that rose from it was stale and cold. You descended into the darkness. Your only light was a small hand torch. The tunnels were a maze of rusting pipes and decaying concrete. The whispers of your unknown ally were your only guide. You were not the first to arrive. A small group of people huddled in the gloom of a larger chamber. You saw a grizzled ex-sergeant from the colonial militia. Her face was a mask of grim determination. You saw a young astrogation tech. His fingers nervously tapped on a datapad. A pair of roughneck cargo haulers stood with their arms crossed. Their expressions were defiant. They all looked at you as you entered. They had all heard the same call, the same whisper in the void. They had all seen the symbol of the broken chain. They were the outcasts, the malcontents, the ones who valued freedom over a comfortable cage. They were the few who dared to fight. You looked at their faces. You saw fear there. But you also saw a flicker of hope, a spark that your defiance had ignited. "I don't know who sent for us," you said, your voice echoing in the tunnel. "But they chose us for a reason." In the shadows of the underground, your small rebellion began. A secret forged in tunnels and whispers. Your resistance was a phantom, a ghost in the machine of the colony. You staged small acts of sabotage, a misdirected cargo shipment here, a corrupted data file there. They were minor annoyances to the Vorlag, pinpricks against a giant's hide. But they were victories. They proved you were not broken. They fanned the flames of hope. The Vorlag grew impatient. Their commander could not find your physical location. The tunnels were too deep, too shielded. So it deployed a different kind of hunter. It sent its greatest weapon, the psychic entity known as the Vorlag, Overmind. It was the Gestalt consciousness of their ruling caste, a being of pure thought and immense power. It did not knock on the door of your mind. It kicked it down. One moment you were planning your next move. The next, your vision dissolved into a gray fog. The sounds of the tunnel faded. They were replaced by a voice that was everywhere at once. It was not a sound. It was a presence. It was the Overmind. It had found you. It invaded your thoughts. It sifted through your memories with cold, alien curiosity. It sought your breaking point. It showed you visions of failure. It made you watch as New Damascus burned. It showed you your friends captured and tortured. It forced you to experience the heat death of the universe, the end of all things. It wanted you to feel the ultimate despair, the utter futility of your struggle. The Overmind's attack was relentless. It was a hurricane of psychic force. It peeled back the layers of your consciousness. It sought the core of your being, the place where your defiance was born. It wanted to find that spark, and it wanted to extinguish it forever. The assault was a siege against your very soul. You were trapped in your own mind, a prisoner of a star-born god. Within the psychic hurricane, you found a strange calm. The Overmind's visions were perfect, too perfect. The fire that burned New Damascus was flawless. The despair it showed you was absolute. There were no rough edges, no messy details. It was a sanitized, sterile version of horror, a simulation designed by a being that could not comprehend true chaos. It showed you a vision of your own death, alone and forgotten in the dark. But the vision lacked something. It lacked the grit, the grime, the simple, undignified reality of existence. In that moment of clarity, you realized the Overmind's nature. It was powerful, it was intelligent, but it was arrogant. It believed its own perfection was the ultimate truth. You fought back, not with psychic force of your own. You had none. You fought back with a memory, a small, stupid, wonderfully human memory. You remembered falling off a bicycle as a child, the shock of the impact, the scraped knee, the taste of dirt and blood in your mouth, the embarrassing tears, the feeling of your father helping you up. You pushed that memory into the Overmind's face. You showed it the imperfection, the pain, the clumsiness, the love, the mess of it all. The psychic storm faltered. The Overmind recoiled as if burned. It could not process the raw, unpolished reality of your memory. Its confidence was its greatest vulnerability. You had found a flaw in the God machine. The psychic attack shattered. The Overmind retreated from your mind with a silent shriek of confusion. The gray fog lifted. You were back in the tunnel. Your friends were gathered around you, their faces filled with concern. You had been unconscious for only a minute. But in that minute, you had faced a god, and you had made it bleed. The comms unit on your belt chirped. It was the hidden channel. The signal was clearer now, stronger. A voice spoke, not in clicks and tones, but in flawed, halting galactic comment. Your mind is strong, it said, stronger than we predicted. The flaw you found is real. It is the key to their defeat. The voice belonged to your hidden ally. They finally revealed their identity. They were the Signian, exiles, a race of beings from a world swallowed by the Vorlag Empire 3 centuries ago. They had been hunted to near extinction. The few who survived had lived in the shadows, a ghost fleet of cloaked ships forever running. They were a people of artists and thinkers, not warriors. Their technology was subtle. It was based on illusion and misdirection. They could not fight the Vorlag head-on. So they waited. They searched for a species with the will to fight, a species with the irrational, messy defiance that the Vorlag could not comprehend. They had been watching humanity for decades. We saw your defiance, the Signian exile said. We saw your stand on New Damascus. We sent the signal, hoping a few would answer. We did not expect to find someone who could wound the Overmind itself. Their ghost fleet was small, only a handful of aging, cloaked vessels. But they had knowledge. They knew the Vorlag's routines, their supply lines, their weaknesses. They offered you a partnership, a chance to turn your small rebellion into a real war. You met with the Signian commander via a holographic link. It was a being of graceful lines and sad, ancient eyes. It showed you the layout of the Vorlag fleet. It pointed to a massive structure nestled within the planet's icy rings. It was the Vorlag's mobile refinery, a vital station that processed stellar gas into fuel for their warships. It was heavily defended. But it was not invincible. A plan began to form in your mind, a daring, almost insane gambit. The Cygnian ghost fleet could create a diversion. They could use their illusion technology to simulate a much larger force. They would draw the attention of the Vorlag capital ships. That would create a small window of opportunity. A chance for a small strike team to get close to the refinery. Your team would pilot retrofitted asteroid miners. Small, tough ships. They were no match for a warship, but they could navigate the treacherous rings. Your target was the refinery's primary energy conduit. If you could overload it, it would set off a chain reaction. A reaction that would consume the entire station, and a good portion of the Vorlag fleet with it. It was a suicide mission. The chances of survival were almost zero. You looked at the faces of your resistance fighters, the ex-sergeant, the young technician, the cargo haulers. They knew the risks, but they did not hesitate. Your defiance had become their own. The plan was set. It was a desperate gamble, a sacrifice that New Damascus might not survive. But it was your only chance. The rings of New Damascus were a glittering field of ice and rock. A beautiful, deadly maze. Your small fleet of mining ships danced through the debris. You gripped the controls of your own vessel. Its name was the Stubborn Mule. It felt appropriate. Vorlag patrols swept the area with sensor beams. You hugged the dark side of a large asteroid, your ship's systems powered down to a whisper. The Cygnian fleet began their performance. On the edge of the rings, dozens of Phantom warship signatures bloomed into existence. They appeared to be a massive relief force, jumping into the system. The Vorlag command ship reacted instantly. Its escorts turned to meet the new threat. They charged toward an enemy that was not there. It was the diversion you needed. "Go," came the Cygnian, commander's voice in your ear. "May the stars guide you." You pushed the throttle forward. The Stubborn Mule leaped from the asteroid's shadow. Your small squadron followed close behind. You raced toward the refinery. It loomed ahead of you, a monstrous skeleton of metal and pipes, glowing with captured energy. Vorlag interceptors rose from the refinery like angry wasps. They were small, fast, and deadly. The battle began. Lasers stitched across the darkness. The rings became a storm of exploding rock and twisted metal. Your mining ship was slow. It was clumsy. But it was tough. You ignored the fighters. Your eyes were locked on the target, the primary energy conduit, a glowing artery on the refinery's heart. The Overmind found you again. It could not be fooled by the Cygnian illusions. It knew the real threat was here. It bypassed the chaos of the battle. It bypassed the hull of your ship. It slammed into your mind with the force of a supernova. It was no longer curious. It was no longer toying with you. It was filled with a cold, absolute rage. "Insolent pest," the voice screamed in your skull. "I will unmake you." The cockpit around you dissolved. You were floating in an endless black void. The Overmind showed you the faces of your crew. It showed them dying one by one. It tried to drown you in guilt and fear. It wanted to break you before you reached the target. But something had changed. Your defiance was no longer just your own. As the Overmind focused its fury on you, you could feel something else. A warmth. A pressure from outside. The linked consciousness of every human on New Damascus. They were watching the battle. They were listening to the comms. They felt the psychic assault through you. And they were pushing back. Their hope, their fear, their stubborn, irrational human spirit. It flowed into you. It became a shield. Your personal defiance was now a focal point for an entire world's will to survive. The Overmind's attack washed against this shield of collective spirit. It could not break through. Your unbreakable will had become a bastion for millions. The Vorlag Empire was built on a foundation of slaves. Countless races, conquered and broken. Their minds were chained to the overmind. They were forced to serve their masters in silent subjugation. The most numerous of these were the Grukar, a race of hulking, gentle beings. They were used for manual labor on the Vorlag warships. They were thought to be simple, unintelligent. The Grukar were psychically sensitive. They felt the overmind's every emotion. And as it focused its rage upon you, they felt its frustration. They felt its shock as your spirit held firm. Through their link to the overmind, they felt your defiance, a concept they had forgotten centuries ago. They felt your unbroken will. A single Grukar on the engine deck of the Vorlag command ship dropped its tools. It looked at its Vorlag overseer. For the first time in generations, it did not see a god. It saw a tyrant, a vulnerable tyrant. The Grukar let out a roar of primal fury. It was a sound of breaking chains. It charged the overseer. That single act of rebellion was a spark in a powder keg. Across the fleet, the Grukar rose up. They were not warriors, but they were strong, and they were many. They sabotaged engines. They attacked their masters. The disciplined Vorlag crews were thrown into chaos. Their empire, built on fear, began to fracture from within. The psychic echo of your defiance had started a fire. Your ship bucked as an energy bolt grazed its wing. Alarms screamed in the cockpit. But you were almost there. The main energy conduit was just ahead, a massive glowing tube of plasma. The overmind shrieked in your head. It was distracted, torn between breaking you and quelling the rebellion on its ships. Now, you yelled into the comms. Your squadron converged on the target. You armed the payload, a modified mining charge designed to create a harmonic resonance failure. You did not have to say goodbye to your crew. They knew the cost. They knew the stakes. With a final push of the throttle, you aimed the stubborn mule at the heart of the beast. You ejected at the last possible second. Your small escape pod shot back into the rings. Behind you, the stubborn mule and the rest of your squadron slammed into the conduit. The explosion was not loud. It was a silent, blinding flash of white light. A wave of pure energy erupted outwards. The refinery's core went critical. A chain reaction consumed the station in a star-bright fireball. The Vorlag warships nearby, their engines crippled by the Grukar, were consumed by the blast. The dawn of reckoning had arrived. You floated in your tiny pod. You watched the Vorlag fleet burn. The survivors, panicked and broken, fled into the void. On the planet below, a cheer erupted, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that you could feel even from orbit. You had won. You had stood against a godlike empire. You had faced its ultimate weapon, and you had not broken. The Signian, commander's voice came over your comm. It was filled with an emotion you had not heard before. You did it, it said. You gave us all hope. The war was far from over. The Vorlag Empire was vast. It would return. But today, you had shattered its supremacy. You had cracked its crown. Humanity was no longer alone. It was no longer afraid. Its future would be forged in the fire of this day, and it would rest upon the strength of your unbroken will.